We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become?
Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
In 1994, director James Cameron and star Arnold Schwarzenegger gave the world a thrilling escapade in the world of fighting terror, one catchphrase at a time.
In 2024, we take a return trip to Scotland to try a Speyside masterpiece.
The film is True Lies.
The whiskey is the Glenrothes 10-year.
We'll review them both. This is the Film and Whiskey Podcast.
Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week, Brad, we are returning to the realms of one of my favorite people. Not just directors, just people. Human beings on the face of the planet.
Close personal friend.
Personal friend, noted great guy, James Cameron. Man, and if ever I have been psyched to talk about a James Cameron movie with you, it is to talk about the 1994 banger of all bangers, True Lies. Brad, before we go any further with anything, I just want to immediately hit the brakes here and ask you, what was your familiarity with the movie True Lies before you sat down to watch it for this episode?
I knew that Arnold was on the cover of the movie in like a suit and tie with a giant silver gun.
And that's it?
That's about it, man.
Dude, those are the ideal conditions under which to watch this movie. Because yes. I feel like this is still a well-regarded movie, like especially in James Cameron's catalog, but it comes between Terminator 2 and Titanic in his oeuvre. And so I think it's always been kind of regarded as like a minor entry into the Jim Cameron catalog. But
and we're here to set the record straight.
Yeah,
Bob.
First of all, absolutely not. But what I love about it is that it kind of is, and I love it. I love that. I love it when auteurs like James Cameron make genre movies that don't have any ambition besides let's make a freaking awesome movie. And then he just succeeds at all levels. And I think when we did Aliens, we've done Titanic, we've done Terminator and Terminator 2. You've always been a little bit iffy on Cameron. And I've tried to explain to you, like, just from a pure filmmaking standpoint, I don't know if there's ever been a better action filmmaker than James Cameron. And I think this movie, honestly, because it doesn't have those ambitions, might be the best example of that. This is like the purest essence of James Cameron that I've ever seen distilled on screen.
Man, you are setting the bar high here, Bob. I mean, for me, T2 is like maybe the best action movie of all time. And so I don't know if True Lies is quite there. That feels like what you're setting the stage for. But Bob, I had a hell of a good time with this film.
Oh, I'm so excited, man. I was really worried that you were going to be watching this movie thinking this is garbage. But my first glimmer of hope was 3 weeks ago when we watched the absolute train wreck dumpster fire that was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And you came in here and said, dudes rule. This movie's great. I was like, oh man, True Lies might work on this guy.
Robin Hood still takes me by surprise how much fun I had with that movie.
I don't know if fun is the word that I would use for that, but fun is absolutely the word I would use for this movie. And we have brought along our resident Dudes Rule co-host for the occasion. Last season, we had him on to talk about Point Break. This season, he said, let's one up that. I've done Catherine Bigelow movies. Now let's talk about James Cameron. It's our friend Vince Mancini. Vince, how are you doing today, man?
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Dudes Rocking is absolutely my lane, and I'm very. Another thing that you don't hear about True Lies, it's James Cameron's only comedy, really.
Yes.
Like, he doesn't really have any other movies that are comedic, and this is like James Cameron was like, I'm gonna do Lethal Weapon, and it's gonna be awesome, and then you get this movie.
Yeah, guys, I can't wait to dive into this movie. It was everything we said last week about The Fugitive and how much it is purely entertaining. I still stand by that. And let's be honest here. The Fugitive, overall, probably a better film than True Lies. I don't know if I have more fun watching The Fugitive as I have this movie, though. On just a pure shit blowing up Tom Arnold level. This movie clearly takes the cake in that department.
I like True Lies better. I'm going to say it. I think there's underrated moments of just pure action movie writing genius in this, beyond the fact that, it's I consider it kind of like a parody. It sort of rides the line between a parody and an earnest action movie. But just some of the stunts and set pieces, I don't think they've been equaled in an action movie. Just the final scene. I don't want to jump the gun on it, but I don't think anyone's written a better action set piece than that.
Well, guys, I don't think we should beat around the bush any longer here. Brad, let's dive into our first segment of the day, which we call Brad Explains.
Brad's gonna give us the movie plot with only 60 seconds ticking on the clock. So let's go ahead and hear your take with this little segment that we call Brad Explains.
Brad Explains is the part of the podcast where Brad breaks down the movie that he has just seen, often for the first time. This is absolutely Brad's first time seeing True Lies. Brad, I want to get to the meat of this episode. I'm not going to fill it with filler here. You have a minute on the clock to spoil this movie. Folks, if you have not seen True Lies, you are doing yourself a disservice. Press pause here, go have a super fun 2 hours and 20 minutes, and then come back and listen to Brad explain it. Brad, 1 minute on the clock, and go.
True Lies is a film about a globe-trotting super spy terrorist hunter played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is married and has a kid, and they have no idea that he is a super spy. His wife ends up almost having an affair with a used car salesman, which sets them down this path of their worlds colliding. There are terrorists that have a nuke. It blows up off the Florida Keys. Arnold and Jamie Lee Curtis are making out. It's incredible. That's the movie.
Dudes rock.
Dudes
also,
rock.
Also, Jamie Lee Curtis rocks.
Dude, she's
So good.
incredible. I think I've always kind of slept on her a little bit because growing up, I remember seeing her in Freaky Friday and Christmas with the Cranks. And that was
yikes.
my Jamie Lee Curtis exposure.
Mm-mm.
And then I saw her in Everything Everywhere All at Once. Now I've seen her in this. She's been in one or two other films we've seen, isn't she, Bob?
Well, we haven't watched Halloween for this podcast yet, but obviously that's where she makes her big debut.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I don't know, man. This might be the definitive Jamie Lee Curtis movie for me. I don't know if
I would agree with that. Yeah, I feel like it's between this and A Fish Called Wanda for her two top two roles for me. But this one, the range is insane.
I was just going to say, I just watched A Fish Called Wanda for the first time about 6 months ago, and I liked it, and it was goofy and it was silly, but this uses her physicality so well, and she's playing essentially two different roles between the quiet, conservative, mousy housewife, and then immediately thrust into, now you have to be a sex pot and an action star, and it's just she does all of it so well. We'll get into talking about all of these performances. Brad, let's set the stage for this movie a little bit here. 2 hours, 20 minutes. We are typically proponents of the 90-minute movie. This is much longer than that. Is this movie too long?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's... See, here's the thing. I remember saying this a little bit about T2, but I feel like the first Terminator and Avatar and some other films, it just feels like Cameron sits in his action sequences a little too long, and not necessarily the entire arc of an individual action sequence. It's little moments. So when Jamie Lee Curtis is reaching out the back of the limousine and trying to reach, and reach Arnold's hand and get pulled out. She tries like 5 times to do it, and it should have been 3. Mm-hmm. And when the Harrier is trying to catch Eliza Dushku, sorry, and it's trying to catch her, it tries to catch her like 5 times, and it should have been 2 or 3 times. And I feel like that happens a few times throughout, but that's the last time you'll hear me talk bad about this movie.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to get it out of the way here. And I remember thinking, I watched this movie again. I've seen it a couple times, but I watched it in 2 sittings, last night and today. I stopped at the 45-minute mark and went to bed last night, and I was already thinking, this movie's too long. And I got to the end of the movie today, and I was like, this movie's too long. It needs to lose 20 minutes somewhere. And then I watched it on Amazon Prime, where you can kind of like hover over the timeline and see little like snapshots of every moment. And so I just kind of like browsed through the whole movie. And I was like,
what can I get rid of?
Where do you actually make cuts? That's the thing, is like the totality of it is too much movie, but that's kind of what Jim Cameron does. He's like, my movie's going to be too much and deal with it. And I can't really complain about that.
I'm totally with you on the idea. Just the idea. I mean, this is like a fun action comedy parody romp, and the idea that it's over 2 hours, like, is like just the idea of it. Like, I agree that it should be shorter. As far as like the stunt on the helicopter with the limousine and the Harrier, like, to me, those are great because he's actually building suspense into his action sequences. And that's something that like modern action movie directors don't do. And so many modern action movies are just like so boring to me. Even like the John Wick series that people love, it's all these tracking shots of him doing like completely meaningless like chop suey and like doing, like, how many times can I see John Wick shoot somebody in the head from close range with a pistol? Like, I get so bored with it. I actually walked out of the latest John Wick movie about 25 minutes into it because it was so boring to me. But like this, it's like James Cameron understands an action movie, an action set piece, in the way that it's like a joke. There's a setup, there's a complication, and there's a payoff, and there's like this complex ballet and choreography. Like, it's this whole slapstick dance, and it's not just this trick of fist choreography. Like, I love fighting and I'm a big combat sports guy, but like, to see that in a movie is very boring to me. Like, you got to go bigger. And I feel like he goes bigger in the way that he makes you wait for that payoff. Like with like her reaching out, like, I was so into it because it's very frustrating to watch, where she's like, just grab his goddamn hand. But it's like, he manages to build suspense into that scene in a way that I love. I mean, if it could lose any, and I don't disagree that I could probably lose like 10, 15 minutes, but I feel like if it's anywhere, it's maybe in the scene where like he's going up the elevator with the horse, like that sequence where he's chasing that guy early in the movie.
Here's the thing about this movie.
Great.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that should have been just the promo. He rides a horse up an elevator.
Yeah.
See, the thing about this film is that it rules. And you can string together any words in a sentence, and it probably is in this movie somewhere. There is a set piece 20 minutes into this movie where Arnold Schwarzenegger is chasing terrorists through a hotel on horseback while terrorists are driving motorcycles through this hotel. And guess what? It's freaking awesome. And I realized as I watched Arnold galloping on horseback that this movie is Cameron at his most Spielbergian. Like, so much of the action in this is reminiscent of what Spielberg likes to do, especially in the Indiana Jones movies. I just feel like there's a ton of that kind of tone here, where I wouldn't call it tongue in cheek, but like, it's lighthearted. Like, there's a
glee to it. Like, you can tell he's having a fun. I mean, to me, it's It's to me, the whole thing feels like James Cameron saw Lethal Weapon 2 and was like, hold my beer. Like, oh, you want to have someone like, because Shane Black loves the device of someone like jumping off a roof, like into a pool. And then James Cameron's like, all right, how can I, because I don't think James Cameron is that original of a thinker, but he is like a brilliant filmmaker and like a set piece designer and a technician. And like that whole horse riding up the elevator, like it feels very Shane Black to me, but he's like, how can I one up this guy? And it doesn't have to be that original, because watching James Cameron try to one up someone is incredibly entertaining every time.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about this, Brad, especially with T2, but the way that the guy establishes the geography of his action set pieces, and let's flash forward again. We keep going back and forth with this movie. This is why I tell people to watch the movie before they listen to the episode, because we're not moving in sequential order here. The film has basically a false ending. You think everything is wrapped up, and then Cameron says, you paid good money to be here. Let's give you 20 more minutes of Arnold Schwarzenegger in a fighter jet fighting terrorists inside an office building. And it is glorious. But the way that he establishes the geography of the floor that they're holding his daughter hostage on, the stairwell leading up to the roof itself, the crane that's hanging off of the roof, like the building that has a giant hole in it now from where Arnold Schwarzenegger blew through it with a machine gun, and it can now fire a missile through. Like, everything involved in that extended sequence is set up so well. And I think where, as much as I like a good Michael Bay movie, I think where a lot of action filmmakers went in the late 90s and the 2000s is, if I just have really rapid edits, people will piece this together. But there really aren't any filmmakers out there today that are able to establish that sense of place in an action sequence the way Cameron is.
I mean, they talk about when people say like someone's playing 10-dimensional chess, like James Cameron is absolutely doing that. Like he like, you're so right. I mean, that's another thing that I find so boring about most action movies is they don't establish a sense of spatial awareness in the scene that they're shooting. And yeah, like you said, like that whole sequence with the Harrier and the skyscraper, like he thought it completely through on every level, and all of the geography of it checks out, and it makes it so much more exciting because of that.
So what do you think it's going to take to get our boy Jim out of the like Avatar, a movie every 10 years universe, and make another True Lies type of film?
I don't think he's ever going to come out. Like, I think he's going to die on Pandora. I think it's more likely that he recreates Pandora in the real world than that he ever actually leaves it at this point. Brad, let's go.
He's trying to do that. He has like an orchard in New Zealand and like a vineyard down there.
He's like dyeing his skin blue as we speak.
I mean, how many other people? Because like if you look back at James Cameron's career, it is kind of what he does. Like he saw, he was like, oh, Alien, or no, sorry, not Alien, but well, yeah, Alien also, but like he took Ridley Scott and he's like, how can I one up this guy? And he fucking did it. Like nobody, who else could do that? And then he keeps doing that, and no one else could possibly even attempt that.
I noticed how early on he was throwing down the gauntlet when I turned on this movie. And Vince, to give you some context, last week we talked about The Fugitive. One of my biggest drawbacks of the movie The Fugitive, a film which I like a lot, is that the director Andrew Davis has like no sense of style. Like that movie could be directed by like Joe Schmo, and you wouldn't like. There's nothing distinctive about it. There's nothing distinctive about the look of that film. It's very flat looking. I said that it looks like TV more than a movie. The second this movie starts, it is this infiltration of Arnold Schwarzenegger going into this party full of, I don't know, like some Nazis. I don't know what they are. Like they all speak German, but like he's infiltrating terrorists at this giant gala where he has to wear a tuxedo, and he scuba dives in. And the look of this sequence, we know that we are in like a frozen wasteland of the Alps somewhere. It has this blue tinted look. It's very similar to the look of the end of Titanic when they're all in the water. And just the use of contrast, the use of shadows. Within 5 minutes, Brad, I made a note in my phone. I was like, this is what a movie looks like. This looks 50 times better than The Fugitive that came out 1 year earlier than this. It just feels so much more, I don't know what the word is, like an event than The Fugitive did.
I mean, everything about it feels so expensive. He was just like, how can I make this look? I mean, there is odd things about it. Like, I feel like watching this in full HD is a little bit different than I remember, because I've seen this movie like a million times. But watching it now in full HD, I can really see like the makeup that Tom Arnold and Arnold Schwarzenegger, like they're wearing a ton of makeup, but everybody has this glow to them that just makes it feel like hyper real. And I kind of think that is intentional, because like I said, it does feel like kind of a parody of the 80s action movie.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that keeps me in the film as you go is this balance. I think he strikes a really delicate balance here between like the home life of Arnold and the work life. And the pacing where he slowly brings those two things together is just immaculately done.
Yeah, so this movie is really evenly split into 3 acts and then like a bonus ending. But like the first act is basically you get acclimated to who Arnold is, and you have this initial pursuit of the terrorists, and you see Arnold's work life with just a little sprinkling of like Jamie Lee Curtis and his daughter. The second act is like a full-blown mistaken identity, almost like 1930s Cary Grant kind of comedy. And then the third act is like a buddy team-up action movie. And it doesn't seem like it should work because they are so distinct from each other, even in terms of their tone. Like that first 45 minutes, there's jokes, and Tom Arnold is doing a lot of the, like, or trying at least to do a lot of the heavy lifting in the comedy department. But it's super serious. Like it's manly action. And then the middle part is such a farce that it's almost like Whiplash. Like all the stuff with Bill Paxton is like, I can't believe this is the same movie as this bathroom shootout I was watching a half hour ago. But to your point, Brad, the way he ties it together, by the end of it, you're like, it works. All of it works. I can't explain how, but this is very uniquely a James Cameron vision.
I don't know about you guys. The bathroom shootout just reminded me a little bit of Mission Impossible.
Oh, yeah.
When he's Henry Cavill fight. There's something there that I was just like, oh, come on, man. This is incredible.
I feel like there's a lot of filmmakers that ripped directly from True Lies. I mean, this whole thing, it plays like an origin story for Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Like, I don't think Mr. and Mrs. Smith exists without True Lies, and like the entire Mission Impossible series with Tom Cruise talking to Simon Pegg on a headset, like that feels directly taken from True Lies. And another thing that I didn't understand about True Lies until, I don't know, like this last rewatch where I actually was trying to find out like who shot this, like who wrote this, like this is so incredible. I didn't realize that it was a remake of a French movie, but like the whole Three's Company vibe makes complete sense when you realize that it's a remake of a French movie for some reason. Like that feels very French to me.
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny too, where Cameron allows the film to get like kind of sexy, and also where it's very American in how chaste it is. Like the Jamie Lee Curtis, is she cheating on him or is she not cheating on him? They go to great lengths to keep her from having any moral gray in that situation. And it's so funny because Arnold is doing heinous ethical shit to her. but like, because we've been with Arnold for 45 minutes, we're like, it's excusable, but she can't cheat on him or even like get close to cheating on him, you know? So I do think it's funny though, like where it becomes very Americanized, you know?
Yeah, it's a beer commercial. I mean, it feels like that whole plot line feels like a beer commercial where it's like, oh man, Jamie Lee Curtis was a conservative secretary, and then someone sprayed her with Budweiser. Now she's stripping around on a pole, and like she's going wild, everybody, and just to like watch that process, like it's total pure Hollywood, in a way that like when someone like Michael Bay does it, I feel like you kind of dismiss it because it's just like one level too stupid. But like the performances in this are so good that it's just like pure entertainment, and you just want to watch them. You want to watch Jamie Lee Curtis perform that scene.
Yeah.
We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become? Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
I was going to say the performances for me are what are just incredible here. Like, I think Arnold is at the absolute top of his game here. I think Jamie Lee Curtis, we already talked about her a little bit. I freaking loved Bill Paxton.
Oh,
I don't know if I've ever seen a hammier, sleazier performance, and it's perfect.
it's exactly what is needed for this movie.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love Tom Arnold too. I think this is some of Tom Arnold's best work. Like, I know he's doing Tom Arnold extra mode, but I think it works. And like, yeah, Bill Paxton is like a riff on James Woods in Casino, but played for comedy. Oh, so good.
The thing about Tom Arnold, and I will say, like, if there's anyone in the movie that kind of grates on me, it's Tom Arnold. And it's not because he's Tom Arnold, because I think he does, like, he has some really great timing. It's that you know that he is so obviously, like, the James Cameron conduit. Like, all of James Cameron's attitudes towards marriage and women, and, like, they all make their way out of the mouth of Tom Arnold at some point. And it's this really... Like, if you wanted to psychoanalyze Cameron through this movie, it's pretty clear that, like, Arnold is who he thinks he is, and Tom Arnold is who he actually is, in terms of, like, his attitudes, his values, his ethics. And so, like, you know, Brad, I talked about how I think the movie can lose 20 minutes. I honestly think that, like, if you cut 75% of Tom Arnold's lines, you would get a better sense of, like, you'd know exactly who the character is, but there would be a lot less, like, cringe-inducing opinions on different kinds of humans than there already are in this movie.
And that's the thing for me, though, that makes... You talked earlier about how Arnold does, like, some heinous moral and ethical things to his wife. I think the reason you're on his side is because you see how, like, honestly dejected he is and how angry he gets when Tom Arnold is suggesting that, like, oh, this is just a normal thing that happens to everybody and you should just get used to it. And you can see, like, Arnold takes everything so seriously in this movie. Mm-hmm. Like, he is passionately all about being a husband and passionately all about being a spy, and the way he does it feels almost childlike in his sincerity. And it just drew me in, man. I think Arnold's performance was, like, the key for me throughout this film.
Yes, I also think Tom Arnold is absolutely necessary, because one of the things I'll say about James Cameron is, like, of all action directors, he has notably, like, more... like less bad politics than your average action movie director. And I think without Tom Arnold, this movie is almost like deep state, like, operator propaganda, because, like, Arnold is too good, and you need... Arnold Schwarzenegger's character is, like, too good, and you need Tom Arnold's character there to remind you that, like, no, these guys are actually pieces of shit. Like the things they're doing are not, like, that good, really. Like, you need him there to remind you what, like, the baseline, FBI, CIA agent is like.
Yeah, and nowhere is that better encapsulated than how he tries to give relationship advice by saying, this is the quote, "We're going to catch some terrorists, we're going to beat the crap out of them, and you're going to feel a hell of a lot better." And, like, I just love that, like, yeah. We're going to resolve this by going to work. And what we do at work is we torture people. And, like, it's funny, but it's also like, oh, this is a little more prescient than even maybe Cameron realized. And I think that's one of my favorite things about this movie, is that for as much as Cameron is doing like the macho dudes rock thing. Brad, I think this is a much better movie about marriage than it realizes that it is. And the lies that we tell to our spouses or don't tell to our spouses, the effects of those things. Also, like, there's some really interesting ethical things about national security. Like he asked Tom Arnold to put a tap on his wife's phone, and Tom Arnold's like, that's illegal. It's a felony. We can't do it. And he pins him up against the wall and he's like, we do it 20 times a day. Like, what's different about this one? I'm like, oh, I did not expect them to explore this kind of territory in this movie. And I love that you get those little touches throughout. But
luckily they don't like dive so deeply into that you can tell it's like an anti-America propaganda movie. You know what I mean? Like they just throw it in there. It's a joke, but it's also kind of like a little bit biting.
Sure.
And then they move on.
Yeah.
And like that's what this movie needs to be. And I think that's Cameron's kind of superpower, is that he always knows, whether it's within an individual scene or, first act, second act, third act of a movie, or the whole movie as, all together. He always seems to know what his movie needs at any given moment.
All right, guys, let's talk really briefly. I mean, we've already talked a little bit about Jamie Lee Curtis. I was surprised to learn when I was researching the movie, I didn't realize she won the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Musical or Comedy for this movie. She does not get a nomination at the Oscars, but I kind of had bought into this narrative last year with her Oscar win that she had like never really been recognized by an awards body before. And I'm at least glad to see that somebody was giving her due for this film, because as good as Arnold is, and Brad, I really think that this might be the platonic ideal of maximizing everything Arnold can give you in a movie. I still think she kind of wins the movie. Like, she is so good. I mean, when they need her to be goofy, she is. The entire sequence where she has to go in and strip in front of Arnold, it works on every single level that it could possibly be interpreted as. Like, right before she walks in and she's like ripping the dress apart to look more sexy, and they have that nice little beat at the end where her heel kind of buckles under her, so you get the like, I'm still awkward. You have the famous flub that they've always talked about of her, falling off of the bedpost, and Arnold didn't realize it was going to happen. And so you see him kind of jump up. All the character beats they give her, she plays them perfectly, but there is such a physicality. And then like, there are moments where it's like, she is supposed to look unbelievably sexy right now. She is supposed to be convincing at this, and she does it. And like, Brad, we don't often talk about like our attraction to people in films on this podcast, but like Jamie Lee Curtis, unbelievably sexy in this movie. Like, I'm not going to lie. Like, that was the point of this character at many times, and she pulls it off. When you take this performance as a whole, this is the kind of thing where I'm like, where were the Oscars in 1994 to, at the very least, give her a nomination for this?
Yeah, she's like klutzy, mousy, sexy. I mean, a lot of the older generation of female comedians will talk about how they deliberately sort of toned down their hotness because they didn't want that to be like a focal point when they were trying to tell jokes, because they didn't think people could laugh and have a boner at the same time. And then in this, like, she's doing Three Stooges level slapstick at the same time as she's doing like a sexy striptease that absolutely works on the level of it being like, yeah, that's an actually sexy striptease. It's incredible what she pulls off in that scene and in the whole movie. And just like the cartoonishness of her character, because she is cartoonishly conservative. That's like her character before that scene. And like, I don't think many people could pull off that part of the movie without it being just like sort of lame and cartoony. And she somehow makes you believe it on both levels.
And that's like, this film, like you said, Vince, it kind of hovers on this line of parody continually. And for her role, she plays into that trope of like housewife that wants to go on an adventure. Mm-hmm. And yet it never falls into a stale parody or a mockery of that trope. And it's because she has this incredible talent for being sincere and authentic And you never lose sight of the conservative, slightly klutzy housewife, even as they move into her being, a sexy spy by the end of the film.
Yeah, I think what both of you guys are trying to say too, and we've talked about this with Cameron, he's just really good at writing female heroines. Like, he's really, really good at it. And he doesn't objectify her in either direction. Like, it never feels like, oh, it's time for her to be sexy, and we're going to do like the Michael Bay male gazy Megan Fox thing. But he also doesn't, like, he's not looking down on her when she is the mousy housewife either. Like, she always has this sense of agency. And for me, the key scene into not just being like a good action movie performance, but like, oh, this is really good, is that interrogation scene when she's gotten kidnapped by Arnold and Tom Arnold, and they're behind one-way glass talking to her. And she's emotional. She's breaking down because she's frightened and she's scared. But then they're asking her questions that are making her question her decisions about whether she wanted to cheat on her husband. And then you get the rage, and she's smashing the glass with a stool, and like the whole gamut she goes through in like 6 minutes. And it is an absolute masterclass.
And the writing of that scene is so excellent also, just in terms of, they've established Arnold as, like this cartoonish super spy character. But then in that scene, he's also kind of like a sixth grader, like passing notes through the glass, like, do you like me? Yes or no? Like, that's the level that he's operating. It's very sort of naive and innocent, which is, like it's an interesting way that they wrote that. Like, you don't expect it to go there. And, I think they're sort of riffing on James Bond a little bit too here, where it's, James Bond is this guy who just like, he's sort of like a living Playboy cartoon, a guy that wears like nice suits and goes and bangs chicks in different countries or whatever. And then, the James Cameron sort of doing that, but giving you this sort of cartoon Norman Rockwell version of it, where he's a super spy, but he's also incredibly faithful. And he just wants to know that his wife loves him. Like, like it works. Again, it works earnestly, but it also works as just a beautiful parody of action movies in general.
Yeah, and I think that like the character that is written for Jamie Lee just has the moments when she's with Bill Paxton, you can tell that she is being objectified, right, by Bill Paxton, and he is a sleazeball, and that's the wrong way to treat women. And when Arnold brings her in and she's doing the striptease, Cameron like specifically gives her screen time where she is making choices to embrace this role. Where, whereas Paxton was forcing her into it and seducing her into it, later she gets to choose how to engage the role of playing this stripper. Yeah. She chooses to rip the stuff off of her dress. She chooses how to do the striptease and things like that. Right. She ends up choosing to punch him in the face and plant the bug and try to get out. Yeah. And there's so much where Cameron gives his women choice. And I feel like that's kind of a consistent thing with his female characters that he writes in his other films as well.
Well, and so there's a moment right after that scene, and it's one of my favorite moments in the movie. They're in the room together. You get the reveal that it's actually Harry, her husband, who has been watching her do this striptease. And before they get a chance to even have like this marital argument, terrorists burst into the room and kidnap both of them. And it is just this wacky contrivance, and like you're off to the races in this sort of slapstick comedy again, this farce. And you get this great moment where she still doesn't understand, even though he's in the room with her, that he's the spy. She thinks that he's been placed there by whoever these people who are playing her are, and she thinks she's a spy. So every time Arnold starts to say something, she's like, please let me handle this. I know what I'm doing.
Shut up, honey.
Yeah. And it's great because she's clearly ignorant in this situation, but the jokes are never really at her expense. They're never making it seem like she's dumb. She's just doing what she knows to do. And I think that what's great about the comedy in this movie is it always lands on that charming side of things instead of like being at her expense. Because I've seen enough crappy Marvel comedy over the last 15 years now that like there's a way that these jokes could go that just don't land at all. And they undercut everything that you've built up to that. But the jokes in this movie are born out of that relationship instead of undermining it.
I was kind of curious as I was watching this. I feel like one of the things that gets laid at Marvel's feet often is this, like, all of their movies are comedies now, but they're not like comedies that's an action movie with some comedy in it. And I was thinking about that as I was watching this film, because it feels for a while like it's an action movie with some comedy in it. But I'm curious where you guys fall on the genreification of this. Because to me, I like the word parody. I do like the idea that it's parodying a comedy and parodying other action films, and it becomes something better than either because of it.
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it like a full parody, just because, like, you know, in the 80s, I think you get like the apex of the parody movie, like starting with Airplane and then all the Naked Gun movies. There's a Val Kilmer movie called Top Secret that parodies all these spy movies. And the thing in those movies is, like, even the action is getting made fun of. Like, the action is ridiculous and, like, not logical, not plausible. I was just watching a clip from that movie Top Secret the other day, and they're having a shootout from inside a building, and they're shooting out the windows, and, like, they're actually playing tic-tac-toe with the windows as they're, like, shooting. Like, it's all played for laughs. And I think this movie is, I would call it a comedy. But it's not, like, the action is absolutely being done in earnest, even when the action is ridiculous. Even when you have a terrorist hanging from a missile by the strap of his AK-47 being shot through a hole in a building into a helicopter full of other terrorists. I think Cameron is like, this is a ridiculous premise, but I'm going to take it really seriously in the execution of it. And I think that's the difference for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it's a full parody, definitely, like, on the level of Naked Gun or Top Secret. It's sort of, it feels like it's a winking satire of the whole action movie genre. And yeah, just that final set piece where he shoots a terrorist who's hanging on a missile through a building and hits a helicopter. I mean, it's hilarious. Like, it's hilarious, but it's also, like, exciting. And it sort of lives on that level of, like, things that you know are not plausible, but you want to see happen just because it's fun.
Yes. I mean, there's a moment right before that where Arnold first shows up in the fighter jet where, like, you can hear the hum of the engine inside the building, and all the terrorists are, like, looking through the windows with their binoculars, trying to figure out. And then Arnold rises up from beneath them, and it is simultaneously the stupidest thing I've ever seen. And also, I was like, I love America. Like, I was so happy to see. And then he just, like, what are the machine guns called, Brad, that spray, like, 1,000 rounds?
Like a minigun.
Yeah, whatever. Like, to see him take out a full level of this building, I was just like, does cinema get better than this? And the answer is no, it does not.
No, it doesn't. And it's like, it's working as a sight gag, but also just as a set piece simultaneously, because just like the visual of that, shooting out a level of windows in like a glass skyscraper, like, so wonderful. And it's like he doesn't tell you, like, yes, this is badass, and he doesn't tell you, yes, this is a joke, because, like, it's both. Like, it's gonna make you smile, and you're like, oh man, that's awesome.
Also, this movie just is incredible. I mentioned this earlier. A nuclear bomb goes off in the Florida Keys, everybody.
No, it doesn't just go. Yeah. So first of all, it goes off, and we're not going to dwell on the ramifications of that at all.
Right.
But not only does it go off, it goes off as they kiss, and it is the accentuation point behind their kiss. And I am like, this is the most brilliant thing anyone has ever thought to put on. It's so freaking cool that I don't want to think about the radiation fallout. I don't think about any of that. I don't care. Like, I get to see Arnold and Jamie Lee Curtis embrace as a bomb goes off behind them. That is pure cinema.
I also think that's a perfect satire of Americana, like the idea that a nuclear bomb's going to go off and we're just going to be like, oh yeah, that's crazy, but also the guy's going to kiss the girl and everybody's going to be cheering and it's going to be like a cool moment. We're not going to think about the nuclear winter or that you just irradiated like a 12-mile circle of marine life. It's just like, oh man, he got the girl. Awesome.
Well, guys, on that note, as we talk about murdering marine life and nuclear winter, I think it's time for us to hit pause. Brad, we have a trip to Scotland to go to. We're going to try some Speyside single malt Scotch whiskey today. What do you say we go sample some Glenrothes?
We're just jumping on a plane and going over, huh?
You know it, man.
Let's get to it.
All right, so today we are checking out the Glenrothes Speyside single malt Scotch whiskey. This is the 10-year version of the Glenrothes. Brad, this is not the first entry from Glenrothes that we've had on the show. We were sent samples of a Glenrothes product by a listener, and I also happened to pick up a bottle of Glenrothes 10 when it was being discontinued in the state of Ohio. And I thought that the sample that we got and the bottle that I bought were the same. And it wasn't until we sat down to record that we noticed that the samples that we had last season were from a bottle called the Glenrothes Bourbon Cask Reserve. So we doubled up, you know? It's kind of nice. We got to knock out 2 expressions of a whiskey brand in one go, basically. So we're finally getting around to this Glenrothes 10-year. Like I said, this is a Speyside Scotch. Brad, if we've been talking about this all season. If you had to decide between the two, are you more of a Speyside or a Highland guy?
Man, that's kind of tough. I think I would lean towards Speyside, but Glenmorangie.
That's the thing, yeah. If only one distillery could survive from either of the two regions, like, I'm a Glenmorangie guy.
Yeah, it would have to be Glenmorangie.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. So this one it's aged exclusively in sherry, I guess ex-sherry casks of American and European oak origin. They are what's called first fill casks. I know we've talked a little bit about first fill before, but it is a fancy way of saying this is the first time we have filled them. We, the Glenrothes Company. They held other things before, so they're definitely used, but we promise, this is the first time we've used them. I just think that's such a hilarious expression because it sounds like they're using fresh wood and they're absolutely not.
It kind of sounds like when you get married and find out that your partner has not only been with you. It's kind of like, I promise, this is my first fill with you.
Yeah. And it's even better because on the box it says that the barrels that they use are first fill, but they are sherry seasoned. It's like, no, they were sherry casks. They're not just, that's like, continue your analogy, yes, Brad, like I'm marrying you, but I am also like Chad seasoned. You know what I mean? Like wait a minute.
It's like they took a basting brush and just like brushed some sherry on the inside of the cask.
All right, man, let's dive into this whiskey. What are you picking up on the nose of this Glenrothes 10-year?
This Glenrothes is a really light nose. There's some honey. There's some kind of florally rose petal type of notes going on. I got a tiny bit of spiciness here. It almost reminded me of like a ginger. Mm-hmm. There's some citrus notes, but overall, it's a little bit ethereal. I think I'd give it a 7 out of 10, Bob.
Yeah, it's definitely very bright. And when I say bright, I usually get citrus on it. And then we typically either get like melon notes, or for me, it's like stone fruit. And I think I'm getting more of that today. It's a lot of peach. It's a lot of pear to go along with like a lemon, almost like a lemon black tea. It's really, really nice, but it smells inoffensive. This is only a 40% ABV, 80 proof product. So I'm not expecting a lot of punch here, and I'm definitely not getting it. But I really like this nose. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 7.5 and hope that it gets a little bit more complex as we go through the tasting.
Yeah, I hate to disappoint you, Bob. I don't know if it got any more complex. It definitely didn't get worse or anything. There was some light caramel notes that came through that were really pleasant. The honey turned into a nice deep honeycomb. There's a little bit of that stone fruit. I would almost call it a prune flavor. And then you definitely get the sherry influence. There's a bit of a grape flavor going on here. It's good, not great. I'll give it a 6.5, Bob.
Man, it felt like it was playing tricks on me because it's pretty immediately like smoke and like raw bitter grain. And then as you go to swallow, it's like, all right, I'm going to turn this up. I'm going to continue the intensity of this. And it just keeps getting more and more and more bitter. Like, it's really bitter. And it's almost kind of like if you eat a fruit and you accidentally like bite into a seed, like if you get into the core on accident, and it's just like, oh, this was not meant for human consumption. Like this part of this fruit, because those fruit notes are still there a little bit, but it just continues to get more and more bitter. Even after I swallow, I'm not a fan of the flavor of this one, man. I'm only going to give it a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I think for me, the bitterness came through on the finish. Like after I had finished drinking it and it sat there for a little bit, it turned a little bit sour, a little bit bitter. There was a pop of spice at the end that I liked. The citrus notes kind of finally came through, but it almost tasted like kind of like an orange that had gone bad. I'm with you, man. It's not necessarily my favorite. I'll drop down to a 6 here.
You're picking up those penicillin notes that we all crave so much in our whiskey.
Tasty.
Okay, second sip was much better than the first sip. I think I just needed to get acclimated a little bit. However, I will say that, like, okay, admittedly, it's not ideal that I just drank coffee before we started recording.
Bob.
However,
what are you doing,
Hold
man?
on. I would think that drinking coffee would prepare me for the bitter notes in a whiskey because coffee's bitter. And this is like significantly more bitter than that coffee was. So, again, after the first sip, I'm drinking it live. I know you had it in the past already, Brad. I still would stand by my original score of just a 5 on the flavor. I think the finish definitely went up in my estimation. It's a lot softer once you start to get acclimated to it. I'll bump it up to a 6.5 on the finish, and I think that'll kind of even out my pretty low taste score.
Yeah, and I think balance-wise, there's nothing special here. It's a 6.5 on balance. The nose leads you to where you're going with the rest of the experience. It just kind of sours by the end.
Yeah, I don't even know if it leads you to where you're going. It almost like it teases you with a very sweet, pleasant, fruity experience, and then it's like, let me rip that rug out from underneath you pretty immediately. I'll give it a 6 on balance. And I feel like that's even being probably a little bit too generous to this. But I think when we get into value is where I'll most likely ding this some more. I remember paying at least $40 for this, Brad, and that was at a discounted price. So what are you seeing it at online?
In general, I'm seeing it between like $50 and $65.
Wow. Yeah,
so we could
too
call
much.
it like a $55, $58 bottle.
You could get at least some products from Aberlour for this price.
Oh, dude.
And
yeah.
they are all better than what we just drank. And so, yeah, I mean, I know it's 10 years old, but like that's how Scotch works. You know what I mean? Like 10 years, a 10-year age statement is like a dime a dozen in Scotland. So I'm just going to give this a 5 out of 10 on value.
Yeah, I think it's a 5 out of 10 value. There's not enough going on here to make it worth that price, especially when, as you said, you can go buy some Aberlour, you can go buy some Glenmorangie, you could go buy some Nomad Outland, Bob, and you would have a much better time.
You certainly could. Man, you know, it's a bummer because I really was hoping that this would end up being a good random pair up with True Lies. I don't think it is, man. I think True Lies is a way better movie than this is a whiskey.
Yeah.
I'm coming out to a 30 out of 50 on this.
I'm a point higher than you, Bob.
All right, so we're coming out to a 30.5 out of 50 on average, or just a 61 out of 100. This is pretty low scoring comparatively, Brad, to the rest of the whiskeys we've had this season.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. We have had a really good run of whiskey. It's okay. We're bound to hit a dud every once in a while. But still, 31, 30 out of 50. This isn't a terrible whiskey. It's just not quite up to snuff, especially considering all the competition that they have over there in Scotland.
All right, man. Well, let's get back to some greener pastures than these and start talking some more about True Lies. What do you say?
Dude, I'm so excited. I love this movie, man. All right, everybody. That was Glenrothes 10, a whiskey that leaves me saying, Glenrothes, you're fired.
Okay, first of all, this is not a movie where there are a lot of catchphrases employed, but I love that Cameron was like, I can't get to the end of the movie without a close-up of Arnold giving the cheesiest line in human history. And you know what? I'm glad he did.
Well, and the wild thing is that he actually had a team of writers write the script for the film. He didn't like any of the jokes in it and was like, well, I'm just going to rewrite it myself. And he only kept like one or two jokes in there from the writers, and that was one of them. Like, that's the one that made it through.
He's like, actually, give that guy a raise. Whoever wrote that line.
Yes. Everybody else is fired except for that guy.
Right. Brad, it's time for me to get fired because this week I have a feeling that you are going to get your revenge for 2 successful weeks in a row at our next game, which we call 2 Facts and a Falsehood.
Brad is gonna try to stump you, Bob. 2 are right and 1 is wrong. 2 facts and a falsehood.
2 Facts and a Falsehood is the part of the program where Brad presents me with 3 items about the making of this film. All of them are presented as fact. One of them is made up by Brad, and I have to figure out which one that is. Now, we have briefed Vince on this already. He is going to be my lifeline if I get stumped. The caveat is, if Vince helps me to victory, I get 1 win in the win column, but if he steers me into a loss, I get double penalized for it. I'm going to get 2 losses. Oh. So, dude, you better not mess this up for me, is all I'm saying. Yeah,
I don't know if I can handle the guilt.
All right, Brad, hit me with your 2 facts and a falsehood.
Fact number 1, Arnold Schwarzenegger had a nearly fatal accident on set during the horse riding scene when his horse got startled and ran out of control. Schwarzenegger managed to slide off the horse, but did it near a 30-foot drop-off. His personal stuntman saw what was happening and was able to grab him before he went over the ledge. Fact number 2, Arnold Schwarzenegger's contract stipulated that he would receive top billing and that Jamie Lee Curtis would be placed after the title card. Director James Cameron, however, saw this as a domestic drama and asked Schwarzenegger if he would be willing to share the title card. Schwarzenegger agreed, which Curtis later described as a, quote, real mensch move on his part. Fact number 3, Tom Arnold was hand-selected by Bill Udovic, a producer at 20th Century Fox who was good friends with Tom, for the role of Gibson. James Cameron was not initially a fan of the idea due to Arnold's highly publicized divorce from Roseanne Barr, but relented after seeing the chemistry between he and Schwarzenegger.
These are good ones, Brad.
Thank you.
I am going to say, I'm pretty sure that number 1 is true. And I say that because I have seen like 10 variations of this story online. It seems like a classic Schwarzenegger anecdote because the reason I say there's 10 variations is the height of the fall that he almost fell from seems to keep going up with like the number of times he tells it. Because I read online that he said it was a 90-foot drop. 30 sounds more likely, but when it's Arnold, he's like, it was a 90-foot drop, So
90 is a lot of feet, guys.
That seems implausible. So I'm going to go ahead and say number 1 is true. I know that Tom Arnold had been quoted as saying that like he had to audition for this movie and he didn't have any expectation of getting it. So number 3 is kind of standing out to me as a potential falsehood because I don't know that he was hand selected for this movie. Vince, what are your thoughts on, especially like on number 2 and 3? Am I going wrong here, or are you with me?
I mean, you said that you've heard a variation of 1 before, because to me, 1 stands out as the one that's more plausible to make up. The Tom Arnold part seems way too specific to make up, but maybe I'm wrong on that. To me, it's between the 30-foot fall and the billing for which one's false, because those are things that seem more plausible to make up, is actors fighting over billing and someone talking about almost taking. And the other thing about the story of him almost taking a fall is, like, there are times when like it's clearly not Arnold doing the stunt, and those are usually during the horse scenes in this. That was when I noticed that it was a stunt double the most often, and that's part of the reason that one stands out. But yeah.
Brad, number 2 was the billing one, right?
Yes.
The reason that one sounds plausible to me is we just did Batman a few weeks ago on this podcast, a film which famously features only one name above the title, and it is Jack Nicholson, who is not Batman. So
not the titular character.
I totally buy that Schwarzenegger would have it in his contract, especially because he was in this like years-long dick measuring contest with Stallone at this point, and they were always trying to see who could one-up each other.
But to me, that's why it seems plausible to make up, because that is a thing that you would assume happened behind the scenes.
I think I'm going to go...
I don't know if I'm galaxy braining too much on that, but...
I was going to say, I think I'm going to go against Vince's best wishes here, because if I go with Vince and he costs me 2 games, then the man will never be invited back on our show. And if we're going to lose, I'd rather do it on my own accord so that we can maintain our relationship. Good. So I'm going to go with number 3 as the falsehood.
So here's the thing, though, Bob. Like, you still got his advice, which means that if you chose wrong here...
Oh, are you counting that as...
I mean, you fully asked him for advice. I think that's like the phone a friend has been called.
Well, shoot. And I already locked in my answer. So this is really, really going to suck if I both spurned Vince and got it wrong on my own.
Oh, man. If there was ever a time I would like to lie to you and tell you that you were wrong, this is it. But Bob, you are correct.
I did it, man. Vince
so
started
the fake
at the
one
bottom.
Was, which one was the fake one?
The Tom Arnold being hand selected.
Okay. All right.
So I read a little tidbit, and I say I read a tidbit. You know how when you watch something on Amazon Prime, it has that X-ray thing, which is just a fantastic feature of Amazon Prime. But it had a little tidbit of trivia pop up that in the scene where Arnold thinks Jamie Lee Curtis is cheating on him and says it to Tom Arnold, he says something about like, my ex-wife took the ice cubes out of my house. What kind of sick person does that? It was a story that Tom Arnold told James Cameron that Roseanne had just done to him when she moved out. And he thought it was so funny. He was like, we're going to put that in the movie. And folks, that's the kind of guy James Cameron is. Publicly airing other people's divorce stories. And man, oh man, what a moment on film.
It really is a great moment. Like that's one of those lines, and like Tom Arnold delivers it with such conviction that you're like, that's not a movie anymore. He is not acting.
I mean, that's relatable though, because I feel like in the situations where I've had like a bad landlord or whatever, I'm like, all right, I'm not going to leave here without taking every single light bulb out of the fixtures and keeping them for myself. You know, like, have you ever done that before? Because I definitely have.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Brad, I know that we said that this is a film that we really love and that we have very little negative to say about it. I don't really have many nitpicks because, again, it's a comedy. Like, everything that's implausible can be explained away by the fact that it is a comedy. I will say, one note that I took down, and it was just a medical question for the two of you. How easily does the human neck break exactly? Because my guy Arnold is just with the slightest flick of a wrist. It reminds me of, like, there used to be a comedian, Will Sasso, on Mad TV. He would do a Steven Seagal impression, and every skit ended with him just breaking everyone's neck in the skit. Mm-hmm. And it was as easy as Arnold is doing it here. So I don't know how many necks you guys have broken in your day, but like it seemed like these are some very flimsy, vertebrae.
I'm not a doctor. I've never broken any necks. I am a jiu-jitsu black belt, so I have choked a few people unconscious before. And my take on this is that it's very hard to break someone's neck. That's yeah.
Bob, I will answer your question with a question.
Yeah.
I think it depends on who is doing the neck breaking.
That wasn't a question, but I Noted, Brad.
I think if it's a frail old woman and Arnold is doing the neck breaking, then like, yeah, maybe.
Sure.
But I think just like a normal like army guy that's trying to kill Arnold Schwarzenegger, I think it's going to be pretty hard to break that guy's neck.
Yep.
Also, the dude that he fights in the bathroom is jacked.
Oh, yeah.
That guy was like as big as Schwarzenegger.
Oh, bigger. Oh, he was huge.
Yeah. I was like blown away. I was like, how did you find somebody larger than Arnold for this movie?
And that's the great thing about the action in this film is, again, it's staged really well. It is taken seriously in the moment. But whatever your preferred flavor of on-film action is, it's in this movie somewhere. Like there is espionage, there's chases on snowmobiles, there's hand-to-hand combat. But then there's also like a moment at the end of the movie where they're trying to drive on the bridge from the Florida Keys with a bomb in the back of this moving truck, and the bridge blows out in front of them, and the terrorists are teetering on the edge, and like a pelican lands on the front of the truck. And listen, the truck falls 4.5 feet into this water. Like it does not fall very far, and it just barely kisses this water, and it explodes in the largest fireball imaginable. And I'm just like, you know what? Yeah, like let's do that. That's how trucks work, right? I just love it, man. Cameron's just pulling out like everything from his bag of tricks. And again, this is like the first movie ever made to reportedly have a budget of over $100 million. And I will say, every dollar of that money is on screen somewhere. Like they did not waste.
You see that money.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of why they wired that truck with explosives, because they were like, we've got the funds. Let's blow one more thing up.
We've got an extra $1 million. What do we want to spend it on?
Yeah. That bird scene is so good because it's like a riff on an old Simpsons episode, which I think Conan O'Brien wrote. It's like the snowplow episode. And there's one point where Homer's snowplow is like teetering on the edge of a cliff, and he turns the radio dial all the way towards the side of the mountain, and it like corrects itself, and he keeps driving the snowplow. And yeah.
There's also a moment in this sequence which made me laugh really hard, because Arnold is like on the comms talking to Marines in a fighter jet, and he's like, shoot these trucks down. And they say, if we shoot these, it's not going to set off the nuke, is it? And he goes, nah. And then he looks over at Tom Arnold, and it's just like, I don't know, man, maybe. And I just love that he's like that careless with his job. He's like, I don't know, man. Let's find out.
Let's just go beat up some terrorists and feel better.
I'm telling you, like Cameron wanted you to remember that these guys are pieces of shit deep down, even though he was making a fun movie about them.
All right, one more nitpick, Brad, and it is a person that I will nitpick about, and it is an actress that is only known from the early 1990s, and her name is Tia Carrere. She is perhaps best known as the girlfriend in Wayne's World, and she shows up here, just being the Wayne's World girlfriend, but the bad version of that. And I gotta say, man, here's the thing about Tia Carrere, not really a very good actress. Like, really over the top. She has a fist fight in the back of a limo with Jamie Lee Curtis at the end of the movie. Sister is just going for it. But also, like, the movie is pitched so high at that point that it kind of works. I don't know, Brad, what's your take on her?
I was going to say, I don't know if anybody could go too big in this movie. Yeah. Like Cameron has set the bar high enough for going big that all the actors were just like, well, we can't not do what Jim is doing. Like, we gotta go big. That's what he needs from us. I thought she was fine. I wasn't blown away by her performance, but I thought it fit the film.
She has like an extra textual quality to her where she's always like a little bit over the top, but that's kind of her, like she's kind of the over the top, like babe character usually in these movies. The acting itself didn't bother me, but the colored contacts absolutely did. I felt like, what did she really need? I don't know. Colored contacts always bug me because they're very
obvious,
distracting looking. Yeah. Though I don't know if you saw The Fabelmans, but like they got a little kid who had different colored eyes than the older kid, and so they had to give one of them fake contact lenses. And to me, it's like, okay, just make us suspend the disbelief of them having different colored eyes, because that's easier to do than watching someone with colored contact lenses for half the movie.
and like from scene to scene, I wouldn't have even noticed what color that kid's eyes were. Like when they're not having attention drawn to them.
I say this as a colorblind man. Like I'm actually like red-green colorblind. So the color wouldn't bother me. But when I see fake contacts, like, come on.
That's funny, man. I do love, Brad, there's just so many little sight gags in this movie to go along with the funny lines. But like, this movie gets a lot of crap when it comes out and to this day about like the depiction of the terrorists and like people of Middle Eastern descent. And it gets a lot of crap for the caricatures that it draws. I don't really know how much time we need to spend talking about that. It is a debate that is being had. I think that it also, like, this is a comedy in which we want to see the terrorists be dumb and get thwarted. And so, like, yes, they're being painted in broad strokes. I will also say I laughed every single time that the lead terrorist guy tried to do something threatening and had everything undercut. Like when Elijah Dushku took the key out of the thing and he's like, "We will turn this key." And they're like, "What key?" I laughed like a little kid. It was hilarious to me. When he's giving his like manifesto and the battery in the camcorder dies. Hilarious. Like I was on board.
That was probably my favorite.
Yeah, I was on board for all that stuff, man. I like it when they make bad guys look dumb. And I think Cameron did a really good job of that here.
Yeah, I feel like the xenophobia is like partly satirical in this movie. And I also feel like it was crazy prescient in that this is a movie where the evil organization is called Crimson Jihad that came out, 7 years before 9/11. And it also has like comically bumbling jihadists. I don't know how many years before Four Lions, but yeah, like it, it hits all those notes. And I don't think it was, I think it was just like doing action movie tropes in that way. And I don't know, for me, it worked.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and it's something that it's easy to come back to, 10, 20 years later and be like, hey, yeah, we don't like that. And I know that there were people at the time of it coming out that weren't a fan of the depiction. But overall, as you said, the movie is not about portraying a specific, ethnicity as dumb. It's about portraying bad guys as dumb.
Yeah.
And that's funny and it works. And I think that's the key.
Hollywood always has its sort of like flavor of the month bad guys. And it's like, what's going on geopolitically in the world? Okay, that is our point of reference to the real world. We're going to make the bad guys be this nationality. Is it good that they do that? No. But like if this movie had been made 6 years earlier than it was, they would have been Russian bad guys. Like that's just how it happens in Hollywood. And so like, yeah, I understand the debate. I understand the accusations, but like,
yeah, I mean, look at Die Hard, right?
Yes.
It's like Eastern European, East Germany bad guys.
Yeah, and then that's 100% earnest, whereas I feel like this is partly a satire of the sort of inherent jingoism and xenophobia of the action movie genre. Mm-hmm. So like it also, in some ways, I feel like it works as a criticism of that because I don't think it's meant to be 100% taken at face value.
When you take Jim Cameron's overall like stories that he tells, that he's not making fun of a minority ethnicity. Like that's clearly what he's doing. And you don't have to just watch this film. When you watch all of his stuff, you kind of get the picture.
Yeah. Well, and again, it brings me back to the last note that I took on this film was the only way that you justify the inherent silliness of this plot is by making some of the best action sequences of all time. Like, you have to pull that off to make this movie work even a little bit. And I think it says so much about Cameron as perhaps the greatest action filmmaker of all time, that he makes any of this balancing act work. And guys, that's going to be my segue into our last segment of the day, which we call Let's Make It a Double.
We're near the end of the episode, so thanks for listening to the Film and Whiskey Show. Let's pair another film with this one, even if it's a struggle. It's our final segment of the day, now let's make it a double.
Let's Make It a Double is the part of the show where we pick a movie to pair up with this one to make the perfect double feature. Brad, I'm going to go ahead and go first because the first thing I wrote down here was I couldn't think of a movie. And I said, it kind of sounds like James Cameron heard the Pina Colada song and was like, I could make a movie out of that. You know that song? If you like
an
Pina
action movie.
Coladas.
Oh, yeah.
Because that whole song is like the worst. Like, if you stop and think about the lyrics to that song, like, it's a guy who wants to cheat on his wife, takes out a personal ad, and then his wife answers it thinking that he's a different guy that she can cheat with. And then they just have a good laugh. And they're like, I never knew that you liked pina coladas. That's this movie. Like,
I don't think my wife and I would have a good laugh about that.
No, I think that would be pretty much the end of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be a really tough conversation.
So anyway,
if she answered it, you couldn't yell at each other because you both like are equally at fault. That's the beauty of the song.
I love in the song too, where they smile at each other and she says, it's you. Like as if she was secretly hoping. It's like, no, you weren't. Come on. You're not covering for anything right now. So anyway, my original Let's Make It a Double was just listen to the Pina Colada song. Brad, I think I'm going to pair this with another movie that is all about hiding your secret identity from your spouse, leading to an epic team up where bad guys are defeated and shit gets blown up. And it is a Pixar film by Brad Bird called The Incredibles. I don't know when the last time you guys watched The Incredibles was. It is truly and earnestly like one of the best superhero films ever. It is unbelievably good. And I didn't realize the extent to which Brad Bird kind of went to the well of True Lies to get some of the tone for that movie. But it is like, for me, I can't think of a better movie to pair up with True Lies than The Incredibles.
Yeah, Bob, that's an absolutely incredible pick. I freaking love that movie, like top to bottom, from Frozone and Mr. Incredible's relationship to just everything going on in that movie. You have it all, man.
Yeah.
What a great film. I think for my Let's Make It a Double, I'm going to pick a movie that objectively I haven't seen in a long time. It's probably like a 6.5, 7 out of 10 kind of movie. But it hits a lot of the similar beats as True Lies, and it has a lot of the similar satirical feel, and specifically of action movies, but more specifically of Mission Impossible movies. I'm going to recommend Night and Day with Tom Cruise and Cameron Diaz.
Wow. Is that Doug Liman, yeah?
I think so.
Yes, it is.
Here's the thing about that movie. Every review of that film I have ever seen gave it 2.5 out of 4 stars.
Yeah, it's like a 6.5 out of 10 kind of movie.
And because of that, I've never watched it. And like, I know I'd probably like it, but there's just something about going into it knowing like the ceiling on this is 6.5 that I've just never gotten around to watching it. It seems like a fun little movie.
That's the thing about it. It has a similar vibe as True Lies. Not as good as True Lies, to be clear. But it has that similar joking vibe with some pretty good action sequences. It's a film that I enjoy.
Yeah, I feel like there are so many movies that tried to do like comedic comedy and then action scenes that were supposed to be badass. And like in my mind, like True Lies is maybe the only movie that pulls it off. There's so many movies tried to do that, and so many of them died trying, I guess.
All right, Vince, what is your Let's Make It a Double?
Can I have two? Because I have two thoughts on this. Okay, so one of them, obviously I've mentioned it, like Lethal Weapon 2. Like this movie very much feels like James Cameron saw Lethal Weapon 2 and was like, all right, I got to up my game. I'm going to hold my beer. I'm going to one up Joel Silver, and I'm going to, make this movie where people do a building jump into a pool, and it's going to be funny, and the action's going to be fun, and it's going to be great. So that's one of them. The other movie that I thought of while I was watching this is Commando, because I feel like Commando is sort of the unintentionally funny version of True Lies. Like that is Arnold at, peak 80s Arnold, where he's, just being a buff guy carrying trees in the forest until some bad guys come along and they kidnap his daughter, played by Alyssa Milano. I even feel like Alyssa Milano is almost, I feel like Eliza Dushku was almost like a riff on Alyssa Milano as Arnold's daughter. But I feel like True Lies takes all of the winks. Like, I don't think Commando was necessarily winking like intentionally, and there's like an intentionality to True Lies where it's like a self-aware version of Commando. So I feel like they make it interesting, and you really see how far Arnold has come as an actor in True Lies compared to Commando.
Bob, I'm gonna follow Vince's lead. I'm gonna recommend a second movie. Are you ready?
Do it.
Yes.
The Nice Guys.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
I think The Nice Guys would be a great fit, like a modern feeling True Lies parallel. I think that would be a really fun evening.
Brad, okay, before we give final scores, you are a, I don't want to call you a James Cameron skeptic. You were never fully bought into the cult of Cameron before.
That's because Avatar is not a great movie.
I'm not saying that was the one that had to convert you. Like, you watched Aliens, you watched T2, and you were like, I get it, but like, I'm still not all the way there. Are you all the way there now? Part one of my question. And part two, where does True Lies fall on your personal Cameron rankings so far?
Man, I think I would put it just behind T2. Like, I think that the dramatic element of T2 gives it a higher ceiling than what you have here. And I don't know if that's fair or not. I know that people give comedy a bad rap in that it can't be as deep as other films. And I don't know if that's always true. But I would feel like T2 has a better, like I said, a higher ceiling. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, though, man, True Lies is a banger. Like Cameron just knocks the action out of the park, the comedy out of the park. I think that I have come around to the point where I would call James Cameron a legend in the film directing community.
He was waiting on that. That was like the last thing that he needed to hear, Brad, was
he
your
needed my
approval.
stamp of approval.
Yeah.
He's at his little garden down in New Zealand, just like, finally, I can feel the psychic energy is changed.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's like, I'm at peace, and then he just dissolves into the ether, you know? Like, he
goes down into the lava.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. He puts his thumb up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's give this movie some final scores, and we'll start with our guest, Vince. Where are you falling on True Lies?
20 out of 10. I mean, yeah, that final scene, shooting a bad guy who's hanging on a missile through a building, hitting a helicopter full of other terrorists. I don't think I've ever seen a better action sequence than that. And just like, and it's like he's doing it. He's doing it as a joke just to prove to you that he can make a better action movie than you can and do it for laughs. Like, incredible.
All right, Brad, let's hear it. New Cult of Cameron member, Brad G.
Oh man, I'm not a big fan of being in cults, Bob.
You sound like you speak from experience. Like I've been burned one too many times.
Oh man, I am going to give this movie a 9.5 out of 10.
Yes,
it's a blast. It's fun. He just takes you on the wildest ride. I think if he cuts about 15 to 20 minutes out, this is a 10 out of 10 film.
Here's the thing, Brad. Every time our friend Patrick Willems comes on the show with us, he convinces me to give a movie a higher rating than I literally got on the horn with you last week, and I said, I'm going to give The Fugitive a 9. And that was because I know that, like, objectively, it probably is a 9. I think my enjoyment level of The Fugitive is an 8.5, and I gave it a 9.5. Speaking my truth, I am with Vince on this. I like True Lies better than I like The Fugitive. Is it as lean and mean and structurally perfect? No, I don't care. It's super enjoyable, and it is a 9.5 out of 10. It is so freaking good, man.
Yeah. Here's another thing I didn't even mention. This might sound really silly. I loved the way this movie ended. Like not even the whole thing where they catch Bill Paxton and make him pee his pants again. Literally just the moment they start tangoing and the way the camera falls back and the credits just start playing and it leaves them in this place where they are moving forward with their life together, unified. Like they're paying no mind to Tom Arnold in the van. And the credits even, like, you know, normally credits play right over the center of the screen. The credits even move out of the way to make room for their new life. And there was something about it that felt so artistic that I'm like, you don't get that with a normal director. Like he even cared about how this movie ends as the credits roll. And there was something about that I was just like, what a great movie.
Well, there you have it, folks. It's a 9.5 from me and Brad. It is a 20 from Vince, which is a first on this podcast. We've never had a 20 out of 10 given before. So
that's a heck of a
if
score.
any movie deserves it, it's True Lies. Let's be honest.
We want to say thank you again to our friend Vince Mancini for joining us today. Vince, where can people find you and what are you up to these days?
I have a couple of podcasts. You can find them both at patreon.com/Frotcast. That's Frot cast. We have the Frotcast, which is just a good hang comedy podcast. And then we also have a podcast called Pod Yourself The Wire, where we go through every episode of The Wire, talk about them individually. The name doesn't make any sense because it started out as a Sopranos podcast called Pod Yourself a Gun after the Sopranos theme song. And we just, we applied that to The Wire. So you can check that out. I also have a newsletter at Substack, vincemancini.substack.com. I read about movies and fun stuff like that. So yeah.
Brad, we are going to go 3 for 3 next week in terms of having awesome guests on the show. Last week was Patrick Willems. This week, Vince Mancini. Next week, we are joined by film critic Bilge Ebiri to talk about 1995's James Bond masterpiece, GoldenEye. What a great season, Brad. Who needs auteurs when you can watch True Lies and The Fugitive and GoldenEye back to back to back?
Dude, I am so excited because, you know, I've seen The Fugitive, had never seen True Lies, I've never seen GoldenEye. And I am just so excited.
All right, guys, join us next week for GoldenEye. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.